All right, in our webinar this evening, we're going to be talking about user acceptance testing. User acceptance testing is something that, as a business analyst, I have at a few different companies been the person expected to lead the user acceptance testing. So occasionally it's been somebody from the testing department, but like I said, for the most part, it has been a business analyst that has actually led the user acceptance testing. So I wanted to make sure that that you guys were clear on what user acceptance testing is, what's involved in it, kind of that process that you go through as far as what it is that you're looking to do as part of user acceptance testing, to make sure you were clear on that in case you come up against being responsible for this. And hang on just a second. Sorry, I've got sorry, hold on. I've got another document I was looking for. Sorry, hang on just a minute. Just got some notes that I wanted to print out to have in front of me, so that I had a few other things that I wanted to say related to the testing that I don't have here in the presentation. So give me just a second to get that document printed, and then I'll get back on track here. Except I have a really slow printer. So I just want to take a second while that's printing to mention that I posted a Analyst Coach version of the 12 Days of Christmas song on the homepage of my website. That's theanalystcoach.net. So if you have not gone and listened to that yet, then you should. You should probably listen to it at the beginning of a day, though, so that you can laugh hysterically and start your day on a good note. It's pretty funny, and there's a reason that I am a business analyst and coach and not a singer, and you will find that reason out when you listen to that song. But it was a lot of fun doing it, so you should check it out when you have a chance. All right, now I have my document. Okay, so getting back to user acceptance testing and what we want to cover here. Like I said, I want to talk about what it is, what's involved in doing it, what the actual kind of steps are that you would take in doing it, and then also talk a little bit about kind of what happens when you do the testing and you have to report a status on the testing, just like you do with anything else that you have to report a status on. So those are the kind of things that we are going to go through here. So as far as what it is, user acceptance testing is a process to obtain confirmation by a SME, preferably the owner or client of the object under test, whatever application it is, through trial or review, that the modification or addition meets mutually agreed upon requirements. UAT is often the final step before rolling out the application. Usually the end users who will be using the applications test it before accepting it, hence the name user acceptance testing. User acceptance testing really constitutes the final phase. I should say phase, not phrase. The final phase of the acceptance stage and is typically required before a project can either move to deployment or go live. Sometimes it's more of a pilot that's happening rather than an actual across the board go live, but it really doesn't matter. User acceptance testing is that kind of last thing that's done prior to that decision to go ahead and move forward with it going live. And that process involves establishing an agreed set of defined and measurable acceptance criteria, involving review of the criteria specified within the business requirements document, and formal sign-off procedures. The outcome is going to confirm that agreed project deliverables have been met to an acceptable standard, demonstrating fitness for purpose agreed between the customer and IT. So the customer being the business side, and obviously, IT being the technical side of the team. So what you're really looking for at the end of the day is for the business to say, you know what, this really is what we were expecting. It's working the way we expected it to. There might be, some little things that, may not necessarily be completely correct, right? I don't think I've ever been through a user acceptance testing phase that didn't uncover, some defects. But what you're really trying to avoid is having any major defects by the time you get to user acceptance testing. So you want to obviously, find and fix those, more critical and major defects prior to user acceptance testing, so that whatever comes out during UAT is really more minor issues. That really is what the goal should be for user acceptance testing. So now let's look at some prerequisites. So before user acceptance testing can be done, the application obviously has to be fully developed, right? We're going to sit people down and say, hey, we want you to try this out. You can't tell them you can only try out part A and part C because B and D we haven't finished building yet. They're going to want to do kind of an end-to-end look at everything within the application. So you want to make sure that it's fully developed and that it's been fully tested, right? So the unit testing, the integration testing, the system testing, the functional testing, whatever it is that your organization calls it, you want all of those testing phases to have already been completed. And then, like I mentioned before, in hopes that any major defects have already been found and fixed before we start that unit testing process or that user testing process. Now let's take a look at what to test. Test cases are created to ensure an effective user acceptance testing, right? So even for UAT, you're going to use test cases. And, most of the time you can reuse the test cases that have already been created for the actual, function and integration testing that has already taken place. But in any case, the test cases can be created using use cases, and they really should be created using the use cases that have already been created through probably by you as the business analyst, right? During the analysis phase of the project, once you've defined the requirements and then you move into doing use cases, those use cases should be handed off to the testing team to create their test scripts, and then those should be used for those same test scripts that were created using the use cases should be used for the user acceptance testing. The testing should be done in an environment that really simulates the production environment. You don't want it to be an environment that is not going to truly function like the production environment does. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of that. One, you want to try not to use dummy data, right? You want to use actual, like a copy of production data. So you don't want, if it involves customer names, you don't want customer names to be things like Daffy Duck and, those kind of things. You want it to be, real data that you've copied from production that you're using to do the testing with. The other thing that you want to make sure of is that your environment actually functions like the production environment would. So if there are services that need to run, if there's data that needs to be sent to, other applications, or you need to pull data from other applications. So for example, you're in your application, you do a search for something. When you do that search, it's going out through a service, maybe to another, a database for another application, and looking up some data that it's going to display for you. You want those connections between those services and those other databases and things to actually be, live test connections, so that it's not, if we were connected to this database, it would return this data. You don't want that to happen. You want, during your UAT, for them to experience the actual process. So you want all of that to be, kind of configured to be just like it would be in a production environment. And I want to mention that the test cases should be written using real world scenarios. And again, not just like, you don't want to have, Daffy Duck as the customer. You don't want to have them testing a scenario that isn't a true scenario in production, right? Because all they're going to be thinking in their head is, well, when are we going to get to the real stuff, and why are we wasting our time doing these things that we know are never going to happen in production? So make sure that you really are using real world scenarios. So now let's talk for a minute about how to test. User acceptance testing is usually a black box type of testing. So in other words, the focus is on the functionality and the usability of the application rather than the technical aspects of it. It's usually generally assumed that the application has already obviously undergone unit testing and integration testing and system testing. All of those phases have already been completed, right? And you obviously, again, you want it to be carried out in an environment that closely resembles that, real world or production environment, right? So there are several steps to testing, and this is step one that we're going to take a look at here, which is user acceptance test planning. So just like you have to do test planning for your integration phase or functional testing, you need to do the same thing with UAT testing. And really, I would say it's most important of all the steps because it affects the actual effectiveness of the testing process, right? It's just like anything else. If you don't have a plan that you're following, then things tend to kind of go willy-nilly, and you don't have any way to track what's really going on, right? And the test planning process should outline your user acceptance testing strategy, just like any of your other testing strategies. And it should also describe the key focus areas that you want the SMEs to focus on during the testing, and then any entry and exit criteria. Our second step to the testing is designing the actual test scripts, right? So we've got our plan together. Now we want to make sure we have our test scripts together. And again, like I said, they could be test scripts that are already written, or there may be a situation where you have to actually write test scripts that are specifically used for the the UAT testing. However, I would caution you to look first for test scripts that are already created that you can use, rather than reinventing the wheel, so to speak, right? And then also remember that if you have a test execution team, right? So you're not the one doing the testing, you have somebody else, then go to them, make sure you're finding out from them where all of their test scripts are stored and how you can access them. They might be in a tool like Quality Center or something like that. Well, now it's called ALM, but most people know it as Quality Center, but might be in that tool. Some other testing tool. Could be that their test scripts are in a spreadsheet. Wherever they are, try to get a copy of their test scripts from them if you have a testing team, so that you can use those for what you're planning to do for UAT. And again, remember the use cases that I mentioned earlier. So when those are available, they want to be used for creating the test scripts. And inputs from the business analyst and subject matter experts are also used for creating the test scripts. So whether you're using test scripts already created by the test team or creating them specifically for UAT, in either case, when test scripts get created, you should be involved in that. So for example, when I'm working with a testing team, typically what happens when they write the test scripts, first they'll come up with the scenarios. What is it that needs to be tested? So here's our scenario A, scenario B, scenario C, so on and so forth, right? So it's really just kind of look at that as like the name of the test script. So they'll come up with test scenarios. I'll review their list of test scenarios and either suggest additions, changes, what have you. And then once we have the agreed upon list of scenarios, then they will go and write the test scripts, and then I will verify those as well. So I'm doing checkpoints from my BA perspective and making sure that, kind of doing a double check for them to make sure that they're covering all of the different scenarios that should be covered, and that what they're doing as scenarios really are those, true examples of what could really happen in production, right? So I do a review of those. So when I'm doing that, or if I've already done that, and then we're having UAT, I'm already familiar with the test scripts because I've already reviewed them, right? And because I've already reviewed them, I can be pretty confident that there'll be test scripts that are going to work for user acceptance testing. So keep that in mind. And if you are not currently reviewing test scripts that are being written by a testing team for the projects that you're on, then you should consider volunteering to do that. Let's see, step 3, selecting a team that would execute the UAT test scripts. So the UAT team is generally a good representation of real-world end users, right? Your UAT team should not be made up of, IT people, right? Unless it's an IT-related project. It really should be actual end users. And I would like to say that in-person UAT is best. You can have a WebEx going and get people involved in that way, but with my experience with UAT, I would say that it generally works a lot better when you get people together in a room. One of the companies that I worked at used to bring in, it was usually around 12 to 15 people for user acceptance testing. And for this particular application, it was a call center application. So we would bring in people. We had 28 different call centers, and we would bring in, representatives from several of the call centers so that we got a lot of different perspectives, right? Because even though those call centers were all for the same company, they all did things differently. So it was really great to get all of those kind of different perspectives in the room and have them run through the user acceptance testing, because invariably somebody from a call center in Kansas is doing something different from the call center in New York, and maybe we thought the way they did it in New York was the only way that anybody ever did it, and then we have Kansas popping up doing this thing differently, which brings to light an issue, a bug, a missed requirement, whatever it is. So really good to have those different perspectives and to have everybody in the room where they can actually talk through those things when they happen. So try to have UAT in person whenever possible. Number 4, the testing team executes the test cases, and they may perform additional random tests relevant to them. And I'm going to say assume they will do that. And the reason I say that is you actually want them to do that. So you want to give them kind of a structure that they need to follow. So you're giving them, a set. So let's say you're giving them a set of test scripts that they need to run, right? So they're going to run through those test scripts, and then you're also going to give them, what you could call playtime, right? Where you just kind of let them loose on the application and they do whatever they feel like doing. And you want to give them that time. Some people say, oh, we don't want to do that. We just want to tell them what to test, and we want it to be a controlled test, and we don't want them to just go off and do their own thing. But if you don't let them go off and do their own thing, then there's probably going to be issues that you're not going to know about until you actually get into production. And it's better to learn about it in UAT than it is in production. In every phase of a project, it becomes more and more expensive to fix an issue, right? So a missed requirement during the analysis phase is not that big of a deal. You're still in the analysis phase. You discover it, you add it, everything's good, right? But as you move into design and then construction and testing and then even implementation and into production, in each of those phases, when a missed requirement is discovered, it costs more to fix it because you're now having to go backwards and do other things, right? And it can affect work that's already been done and cause that to have to be redone as well. So you want to find issues during user acceptance testing. You don't want your goal to be, hey, I don't want to find any issues, right? I want everything to be rosy and perfect. You should look at it as your goal is to find problems. Let's see. Step 5 is documenting the defects. So the team should be logging their comments and any defects or issues that are found during testing in either a spreadsheet, a defect tool, whatever it is. Typically for UAT, even if I work for an organization that uses a testing tool like Quality Center or something like that, during UAT, I'm keeping track of the defects in a spreadsheet. They're getting entered into Quality Center at some point, maybe at the end of the day, the morning of the next day before we get started, I'll enter them into Quality Center. But for purposes of keeping track of them in the class, I'm going to keep them in a spreadsheet. And then I'll use that spreadsheet to, to have my data with me to create those defects in Quality Center. But I'm going to start out putting them in a spreadsheet. It's just a little easier to keep track of them, to be able to see everything together, to know what's been open. Somebody discovers a defect and they come to you with it. You can look at the list fairly easily and quickly and say, hey, that's already been reported, or no, it hasn't. We do need to go ahead and record that one. So make sure that those kind of things are being tracked somewhere. Next we have, I think I skipped, sorry, hang on. I skipped 6, I believe. Yep. So step 6 is resolving issues and bug fixing, right? The issues and defects that are found during testing absolutely should be discussed with the project team, the SMEs, and of course the business analyst. You really should be leading that conversation. And then the issues should be resolved based on whatever consensus you've come to and to the satisfaction of the end users. Now, if they find, let's say they find 15 defects during user acceptance testing, if something isn't being done right away to resolve those issues, then they're not going to have very much confidence in the application. What they're going to say is, hey, in one day we found, 15 bugs, or in 2 days we found 15 bugs. So that means how many more of them are out there that we didn't find? That'll be kind of that attitude that could start sinking into everybody's mind, especially if they talk about it. So you want to make sure that you've got a plan of action in place for fixing the defects. I will tell you, one of the things that we did really well at one of the companies I worked at that really did work well was having a developer in the room with us during user acceptance testing. So when we had a defect that was discovered, let me talk for a second about that process. So we'd have the SMEs testing. Let's assume one of them finds a defect. They find a defect, they come to me, they call me over, whatever it is. I'm looking at it. Either I agree with them that it's a defect, or maybe it's user error and they didn't understand how to do something, so I explain that and walk them through it, and it's fine. But assuming that it is a bug, then the next thing to do would be to call the developer over. They're right there in the room. Call them over, have them look at it, have a conversation. They're going to go right back over to that seat and start working on a fix for that. That shows the people that are involved in UAT, just kind of gives them that kind of level of confidence that you really are taking care of things. And then I'm going to go to my desk and I'm going to put it on the spreadsheet, right? But I've already got somebody working on it. I'm not worried about just logging it in a spreadsheet and then following some process. I've got the person in the room, get them working on fixing it. Or if they're not the developer that knows how to fix that particular piece of code, they're on the phone with whoever it is and they're telling them about the problem and they're getting it resolved. So either way, we've got work happening kind of right there on the spot to help resolve those defects. And then typically what would happen in this situation, we always had UAT that was a couple days long. So anything from that first day that would get fixed, there would be a build that would migrate all of the fixed code to that test environment that night. And then, the second day of the user acceptance testing, they would be able to look at it again and then have a level of confidence that, we resolved the issue. For things that were found on the second day, we would still have them after they got back to wherever their real job was. Things that came up on the second day that we then got fixed, I would simply email them and say, hey, can you log into the test environment and check this out? We fixed it. Want to see what you think? And again, still giving them a level of confidence that we're taking their issues seriously and we're resolving them as fast as we can. So I just wanted to say a little bit about that and my experience related to that. Next, we have sign-off. So when you have a successful completion of user acceptance testing and the issues that are going to be resolved have been resolved. Sometimes there's issues that don't get resolved right away, right? There can be low defects that are not necessarily harmful to the users or to the application going live with that defect. So decisions can be made that, we're going to move forward with this even though we're not fixing this one. So, whatever has been determined as far as the resolution for the issues go, once that's been done, then we're expecting sign-off on UAT. Once the user accepts the software delivered, then they're indicating that it really does meet their requirements. Does not mean that they're saying it's perfect or that it's bug-free. Just that it meets their requirements. And then they can now be confident that the software solution that's being delivered. So again, the entire time that you've been going through that UAT process, you're, standing right there with them. You're looking at the defects that they're finding. You're getting the developer to work on them. Then you're, showing them, hey, here's the fix. Everything's working great now. All of those things are building towards that confidence that we want them to have so that they're going to sign off on the project, which is really the most important thing at the end of the day. Obviously, we want to deliver good software, right? But when we're talking about UAT, our goal is sign off. So that's what we want to make happen. Now, what needs to be in place for you to do user acceptance testing? There needs to be a project charter. Goals, objectives, benefits have to be defined. There obviously has to be a test plan with a scope of the test scripts that are needed. There should be high-level process maps or process flow diagrams, whatever you want to call them. Detailed process maps, which kind of gives you a visual of the picture. Configured testing should have happened, which is sometimes also referred to as stage. So we're talking about your environment here, not actual testing that takes place, but the environment that you're going to do your testing in. Sometimes it's called the stage environment. Sometimes it's even called the UAT environment. You may just have environments that have numbers. I've had that at some of the places I've worked at, where we'll have a system testing 1, system testing 2, system testing 3. So, they get called ST1, ST2, ST3. And depending on, what release you're working on or where you're at in your testing, you might be testing an ST1 or an ST2 or whatever it is. So there needs to be an environment like that that's configured for UAT. And remember, that environment needs to be a very close replication of the production environment. There should be a testing script sequence established. What order are we going to do things in? And your testers, when you're thinking about, who is it that I need to do testing, they should be power users, key stakeholders, and then you want at least one person in the room that has very little knowledge about the requirements, so that you can really see how they go about running through the tests and what they see and what they try to do, even though they weren't involved in defining what the requirements were. Because a lot of times that person is going to be the one that's going to find things because they don't have any, I guess you could say, clouded judgment. The people that have been working on the project team could have been looking at all of the functionality for months and talking about it and looking at it for months, going through the analysis phase of the project and, going through the design and the coding and the testing. And, by the time you get to UAT, the people that are working on the project have kind of seen everything up to then, right? And there could be, they just may not have that perspective that somebody that is kind of clueless about it has. So you want that clueless person to also be included in your user acceptance testing. Let's look at the key deliverables for user acceptance testing. There are 4 things here that are important. Obviously, the test plan, which outlines the testing strategy, the UAT test scripts, right? You got to be able to hand them some test cases so that you can help them to effectively test the application. Again, you want to give them that period of time where they can, just play with the application. But you also want to make sure, if you just told them, hey, these people all know what they're doing. They do their jobs every day. I don't need to give them test scripts. They know how to do what they do. Just let them go do it. They're not going to perform every function that can be done. They're going to focus on, hey, here's the things that I do most in my day, and that's what they're going to go to and test. But there could be those things that they have to do once a week, once a month, once a quarter, whatever it is that they don't even think of if they don't have a list of things there in front of them that they should be testing. So you want to make sure that you have those test cases, not because you're trying to cage them into, just testing this one area. Your test script should cover all the areas, and you want to make sure that you're giving them, ample time and the reminders of all the different areas that need to be tested. You should also have a test log. That's where you're, kind of keeping track of which tests have been executed. I would say which ones have passed, which ones have failed. For ones that have failed, you would want to have a place to put defect numbers in there. All of those kind of things come through in the actual results part of it. And then the fourth thing is user sign-off, right? The important thing, right? Our goal at the end of the day is to get sign-off and approval so that, these changes can move into production. So again, the sign-off is what indicates that the customer finds the product delivered to their satisfaction. Does not mean that there aren't defects, just means that we really did give them what they were looking for. Let's see. Next, I want to talk a little bit about user acceptance testing roles. It's the responsibility of the project manager to communicate with the customer and agree to the format and scope for UAT. If necessary, the project manager should schedule a meeting in order to agree on defined acceptance criteria if it's necessary. The business owner, as the representative of the end users, has responsibility to ensure that user acceptance testing is completed and report back to the project manager within the agreed term and time frames. Now, I will tell you, I've worked at some places where the project manager has been very involved in UAT. They've been in the room, they're seeing what's going on. And I've worked at other places where the project managers are very hands-off about UAT, and you absolutely would need to do the whole reporting back thing because they don't actually know what's going on. So it just depends on what kind of environment you work in as to whether or not they're closely involved in UAT. So now let's look at some responsibilities for UAT. The project manager's responsibilities are to resolve issues and to keep track of the change control process, which involves severity levels of defects, right? We're going to go through that in a minute or so. And then we have our business partners and subject matter expert testers. Their responsibilities are to be familiar with the process on the business side, communicate to participants both internally and externally, write and update the first draft of scripts. Now, I will tell you that I've worked at places where they have had people from the business side write some of the test scripts that they're doing, and then where the IT team has just supplied all of the test scripts. So it can go either way, depending, again, on how your organization does business. You should be giving them some test scripts from IT, right? But they may come up with some of their own test scripts based on their day-to-day operations and business processes. They're responsible also for developing a summary presentation for the leadership team and running and executing the test scripts, obviously. And then you as the business analyst, who is probably the meeting facilitator, I always was, you are responsible for verifying, refining, finalizing, and approving the test scripts, conducting the UAT event, right, actually putting on the UAT event, securing the testing location, managing the issues list, summarizing test results, and develop a summary of the UAT presentation for leadership team. Now you see I've got this on here for the business analyst, and I also had it on here for the business partner. And again, this is because I've seen it done both ways. And that's why I highlighted this in red, is because I just wanted to point out that it's in both locations. So you may work somewhere where they expect you as the business analyst to do that, or where the business side meaning either the stakeholder, business partners, somebody that's from the business side is going to do that write-up and do that presentation to the leadership team. Or it may be you, or a combination, right? You could be creating slides for the presentation, but the business could be the ones that are actually doing the presentation. So it can be an either or a combination thing. The role of the subject matter expert is to attend user acceptance testing at an offsite facility, unless you're traveling to where they are to hold user acceptance testing there. They're going to execute test scripts. They're going to identify defects. They're going to attend the defect and issue meetings. They will participate with the BA in giving status on defects, concerns, testing problems, etc. They're going to validate the changes and the fixes from UAT. So you know how I said if you've got a developer sitting in the room and they're fixing things right away, they do a build to the environment and say, hey, I've even had that happen where, how I talked about, at the end of the day that night, we'd move the new code into the environment, and the next day they would test it. Depending on what's going on, it could be that, when they take their lunch break, we actually move new code in so that afternoon they can do more testing. So there could be changes made literally during UAT. They should also provide feedback related to future change requests and enhancements, and you'll see that a lot in UAT, where they're like, oh, this is great, but it would be awesome if it did this too. Or, hey, next time can we get this? Or I'm seeing this problem and it would work better if we did it this way. So you're going to get enhancements that come out of UAT, and you want that because you've got everybody there together, everybody's communicating. You want them to take the opportunity to let you know what else it is they would like to see in a future release. They should also provide feedback related to any process needs that are discovered in testing and any training needs discovered in testing. So sometimes during UAT, what will come to light to them is, hey, we thought that this was going to be, fairly simple, and the trainers could create, a few, job aids, maybe a report that was 2 or 3 pages long, and we can hand it out to everybody. But, this is actually going to require some hands-on training. Maybe we're going to need a 2-hour, training class where we pull people in and train them. Those kind of things can be discovered during UAT, where they think they're going to do something related to training one way, but they realize in actually getting their hands on it and using it that they might need to make some adjustments to that. And also the process changes. If you're changing how they do business, then by doing UAT, that really will help them identify, hey, here's some processes that we're going to need to update the documentation on, because now we're going to do these things differently. And we're going to need to make sure that everybody understands how to do them. And then obviously the approval of UAT, right? That's the last thing, the go, no go kind of thing. If they don't sign off on UAT, then you should never move code to production without having that sign off of UAT. Next, we have risks. So this is risks of doing UAT, but it does not mean that you shouldn't do it. We have reputation risks. We also have legal risks, time risks, and resource risks. Now, what I want to do is just kind of explain this a little bit so that I make sure that you understand what I mean by these things. So reputation risk, there is a risk that if the product isn't working correctly, or there's a lot of defects found, that kind of thing, then it can affect the reputation of the IT department. It can affect the reputation of the the company, depending on if your user acceptance testing are people outside of the company, then if things aren't going well, it can mess with the reputation of the company. So it's not an excuse to say, hey, we're not going to do UAT because we don't want this to happen, right? The way to make sure it doesn't happen is by having a solid application that works well, right? So the risks, I'm telling you, are not to scare you or to say, hey, I should suggest that we don't do this. It's so that you know what the risks are and you can make sure that you don't run into those. Next, we have legal risks. So legal risks can come from, if there are things that are not operating or functioning correctly when you have regulations and things that you need to follow, right? So you don't want to have an issue where you have certain regulations, and in the changes that you've made in the application, now you're not following those regulations, and that creates a legal risk. And if you go to UAT and there's something that's like that, then it could be harmful. So you want to make sure that if there are any kind of certain things related to either, let's say, for example, SOX compliancy. Everybody pretty much knows what that is, right? It has a lot to do with the privacy and protecting people's information and things like that. And then we also have maybe regulations by, counties, cities, states, or federal government level, right? So any of those kind of things that aren't functioning correctly could create a legal risk. Time risk could be related to not having enough time to do UAT or rushing through it, because UAT is that final thing that happens right before production. So what do you think happens there? The development team takes longer to do their development, so that means that the testing team is going to get less time to test. In order to make up for that, they're going to take some of the UAT time. We were going to have a 3-day user acceptance testing. Now we're going to have a 1-day user acceptance testing. So you do that, then you've got the risk that you're not going to have any time for UAT if you keep kind of, sucking up the UAT time in other processes. But then there's also that time risk that's specifically related to actually doing the UAT and not having enough time to do a full and complete user acceptance testing. And then the resource risk is related to, just not having the right resources doing the user acceptance testing that can help identify problem areas that should be caught prior to going to production. Where does UAT fit within the project plan? It is recommended that UAT is done 2 weeks prior to, or 2 weeks between UAT and go live. So my personal recommendation is that UAT is actually done, that it's done, I would say done 3 weeks before go live, because that gives you 2 weeks to correct any issues, right? So if your UAT is a week, or it's 3 days, or it's 2 days, whatever it is, then it should be done that 2 days before, a week before that 2 weeks. So if you're going to, something's going to go live on the 15th of the month, then by the 1st of the month, you want UAT to be done. Doesn't matter if your UAT is, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 5 days, whatever it is, you want it to be done by the 1st, so that gives 2 weeks to get any changes, corrections, anything done. Now, not always feasible. A lot of times what happens is that you're doing it that first week and then fixes that second week. And I've even been involved in times where, it's, hey, you're going live on the 15th and on the 12th you're doing user acceptance testing, which then that's one of those time risks and can create a problem if, in fact, there is a major problem that is found during UAT. So you want to try not to do it definitely that last week prior to go live. Now let's look at some testing status definitions for user acceptance testing. So we're going to use that standard, green, yellow, red that you're probably familiar with. And green meaning, hey, we're good to go. Yellow, we've got some issues. Red, we've got some major issues. Stop, hold the presses, right? So that's kind of what our green, yellow, red is. So for a project to be green or user acceptance testing to be green, then we would say that it has met 75 to 100% of testing cycle objectives, and that we're able to defer the remaining testing cycle objectives without impacting other teams or affecting the overall testing objectives and timelines. Next, all Severity 1 incidents are meeting resolution service level requirements, and there's sufficient time to fix and retest within that UAT test schedule. Defined fix and retest activities have been planned within the established timeline and cycles, and there's sufficient time to execute with no impact on the overall project timeline. So that's what a definition of a green UAT status would be. Yellow would be that we met less than 50 to 75% of our testing cycle objectives, that we're still able to defer the remaining objectives without impacting other teams. Severity 1 incidents are not meeting service level requirements for resolution. Sufficient time to fix and retest is trending to risk and requires escalation. Incidents affect other partners' ability to meet cycle objectives. So those are the things that are going to say, hey, this is yellow, meaning it could go red. It could go wrong, right, if we don't get these things resolved. When it is a red status, the definition of that would be that you met less than 50% of the testing cycle objectives. Severity 1 incidents are not meeting service level requirements for resolution. Sufficient time to fix and retest is at risk and requires the next level of escalation. And incidents severely affect other partners. So those are our definitions. And then I want to look at those severity levels that I mentioned. So, back here we were talking about severity 1. I want to make sure you have a good understanding of what those are. So severity level 1 is related to critical business impact. So if it's a 1, there is a critical impact to the business. So the production use of the software is stopped, or it's so severely impacted that you just can't reasonably continue to work. Severity level 2 has significant business impact. Now, what's the difference between significant and critical? Significant would mean that there are important features of the software that are unavailable with no reasonable workaround. So with Severity 1, it was kind of like you're dead in the water, you really can't do anything. With Severity 2, I would look at that as you're kind of dead in the water on certain things, but not on everything, right? There's certain areas where there are problems that you can't get past and that there aren't any workarounds for. Severity level 3 would mean that there is some business impact. So the definition for that would be that there are important features of the software that aren't available, but there's a workaround available. Or maybe there's, some less significant features of the software that aren't available, but there is no reasonable workaround for them. So in the case where you have some important features, there's an issue, but there's a workaround. It's like, okay, we can't do it the way we meant to, But at the end of the day, we can still do our process. We can still get done the work that we need to do by doing it this way instead until we get this fixed. And then the other thing that you can have with that is that, again, like I said, that there's, some less significant features. So that they just plain don't work, and there is no workaround for them, but maybe they're used, once a year or once a quarter, or, it's really related to what you would call an edge case or a corner case where, it's really few and far between where it comes up, right? There's some time to go ahead and fix it. So there is some business impact, but it's not a high risk type of impact. Then our severity 4, it means that we really have minimal business impact, right? So some examples of a severity 4 might be things that are, some visual things that could be wrong. Maybe there's a field in the wrong place on the screen. The field still works, it's just not where we wanted it to be. It's not as convenient over on the right-hand side as it is on the left-hand side where we wanted it to be at. Maybe there's a word that's misspelled in the copy. Maybe there is a problem with the font size or a color on the screen, something like that. It's really minimal business impact, doesn't stop them from being able to do the functions that they need to do. So those would be the different severity levels that you want to take into consideration for defects that are found during user acceptance testing. And I mean, this is, standard severity levels that can be used in any phase of testing. But, since it's obviously user acceptance testing we're talking about, I wanted to, point these out for you for that. So that, I think, wraps up what I had to, what I really had to say about that as far as what I've got here goes. But I did want to just mention a couple other things related to, personal experience of doing user acceptance testing. I mentioned earlier that people are going to give you requirements during user acceptance testing, and you want to encourage that, right? You want to get requirements from them. What you want to make sure doesn't happen is that UAT doesn't get derailed into becoming a requirement session and you're spending all of the time talking about the future things that they want, right? When they tell you, hey, it would be great if it could do this, or why can't it do this, or what can we do about this? You want to take those things down for future conversations. So you definitely want to make sure you get them written down. Sometimes I have put paper up on the wall, and we've written the things on there as we have identified them, which is great because if you're having let's say you do have 12 people in the room doing user acceptance testing, and you have somebody that calls you over, you're looking at something, you start talking about it, they tell you about this, enhancement that would be great, you go write it down. The rest of the people in the meeting maybe didn't hear it. So if you put it on, either a whiteboard or paper on the wall or something like that, then other people can see what got captured for that. Short of that, you want to make sure that that you're letting everybody know what those enhancements are. Sometimes what I would do is have a save part of the day at the end of the day for a recap, right? So we're going to not just talk about how testing went, but we're also going to talk about what enhancements were identified during the day as well. So that way you are, kind of going back over, hey, here's what we accomplished today. Here's the defects that we found today. Here's the enhancements that we identified today. And then, you come in the next day and you kind of pick up with, all right, so we got through all of this yesterday. Now today we're going to focus on this. So just wanted you to kind of keep that in mind, that you don't let your UAT turn into a requirement session. The other thing that I want to talk about for a second is when, earlier when I said that you want to make sure that you have test scripts available and already ready for them. I found that it was easiest for people if we had the test scripts printed out for them. So I know that might seem like, we're killing trees because we're, printing all of this paper, especially if you do have a large UAT group that, is 12 or 15 people and you've got a lot of test scripts that they're going to go through. But it really seemed helpful to people to have that paper next to them, and they would walk through the steps and they would make notes on the paper about things that were right or wrong or good or bad, or, they check it off, big check mark in the corner if that one was good, things like that. So it's actually helpful to them to have it in paper and not just say, hey, in your email, I sent you a spreadsheet with all of your test scripts, right? Print it out and have it there for them so that they can take notes on it and check things off and that type of thing. It just really seemed to work well when I did that. So those were the other couple of points that I wanted to make. And I really hope that you have enjoyed this presentation on user acceptance testing. Thanks. Have a good night.